Hi guys, I'm Judy Elmore and I'm a freelance editor with Black Wolf Editorial Services. Happy New Year and welcome to 2019. For the past few weeks, we've been talking about various different stages of editing. We've been talking about what developmental editing is versus copy editing. We've been talking about some of the editing tricks that I use myself, and we've been talking about what show is versus tell. Today, I want to talk about depth of perception, or deep POV as some people have come to call it. But before we can actually delve into what deep POV really is, we need to talk about various other aspects that are all associated with perception within narrative. Let's start with first person versus third person. Well, to put it simply, first person is where we start using pronouns like I, me, we, my, our, and we start talking about things that are mine. Okay, when we start moving into third person, we're talking about, say, he, she, they, his, hers, theirs, that sort of thing. There are other pronouns that I know are used within third person, especially when you start talking about genderless writing, but these are the pronouns that are traditionally have been used. Within first person, your narrator is in the thick of the action. Typically, you're dealing with your protagonist. Sometimes you're dealing with your antagonist, or you could have a secondary observer. This is particularly the case when you are going to be talking about, your sidekick is actually doing the narration. Within third person, your narrator could be in the thick of the action, or they could be just an observer of the action. And we'll talk about this one in a bit more depth in a sec. Within first person, your POV character, your point of view character, is your narrator. But in third person, they may be your narrator. And it does cause a little bit of confusion. Within first person, deep POV is implied. Because without that depth of perception, it is literally just a collection of I's, me's, and we's. Within third person, it can be either shallow or deep, depending on your writing style and how it's constructed. So let's talk about the difference between omniscient and limited close. And I will apologize now if I by accident slip and called omniscient omnipotent, because I have always known it as omnipotent. But when I was putting together the slides for this presentation, I realized I was using the wrong word all of this time. So I've put the correct word in, and yeah, it still feels wrong to me. But that's okay. We'll carry on. Within the omniscient point of view, your narrator knows all and sees all. They're a bit like God, basically, looking down on the world, and they can jump into anyone's head. They know everything, what everyone's thinking, and off you go. But within limited POV, the limited close in particular, you're dealing with your narrator only sees what one character will see. They have a very limited point of view, and in a way you can think of it like a tunnel vision. Then we delve into something else. Your POV shifts frequently between characters within your omniscient point of view. That can be disorientating, but some readers love it. Within limited close, you tend to stick within one character for a particular passage. Now, that passage may actually be a chapter, or it may be just a section, but there will be some sort of indicating transition that will go from one POV character to another. It will not be just this seamless transition that you will get within omniscient point of view. Omniscient point of view needs third person for it to work. In fact, I don't even think it will work in any of the other points of views. I've never seen it applied in any other way. But limited close can use first, third, or for that matter, second. Now, I haven't talked about what second person is, and that's basically when you're talking about the you did this and you did that. And there's very few number of books that are executed well within second person, which is why I haven't actually gone into any depth about what second person is or how it works. But that's okay, we'll carry on. So, omniscient point of view, even though it's constantly flipping and shifting between different characters, it should not be confused with a multi-POV story, because it's not. What it's doing is it's hovering over the top of all your other characters, and it knows exactly what all the characters are thinking, how they're working, all these bits and pieces, and it's putting it all together. It is not a multi-point of view story. It is a God story, a godlike perspective, where your multi-point of view stories tend to fall in the limited close perspective. So you'll have, for a chapter, you might have one point of view from, say, your protagonist, and then another point of view from your antagonist or your sidekick. And it has this constant switch, but there will be either a chapter break or a section break at each transition between different point of views. So what actually is deep point of view? Well, deep point of view is a whole different way of using show to get into the head and the inner workings of your point of view character. The deeper you go, the deeper you are in that character. The narrator is always your point of view character at that point. And what is really the distinction between deep point of view and, say, shallow point of view is that your personality of your character takes over the narrator. So when you switch point of views, you will see it because the whole personality of your narrator will shift. Within first person, you need that deep point of view perspective. You cannot have it without it. Otherwise, your first person is just a collection of I's, me's, and we's. That's it. If you are shifting from one perspective to another, you need to have that distinctive voice to go from that one perspective to the other, and that personality needs to go with it. Otherwise, you have failed to execute that deep point of view. And in first person, you're going to fail to hit the mark, full stop, without it. Third person using deep point of views, they border on first person perspectives. Okay, take this example. This example is in third person. I'm sorry for the wait, Miss Zabrowski. I'm Detective Paul Martin. I understand that you're here to talk about your mother's case. A plainclothes cop sat down at the conference table with his back to the door. He looked to be a little too young to be a seasoned cop. Veronica's shoulders sagged. It's Zibataski, she said, correcting his mispronunciation of her name. There's nothing wrong with that passage, but you don't really get a sense of the personality of who is the narrator here. The narrator could easily be Paul, or some other godlike person, or it could be Veronica. We don't know. Okay, we need to change and deepen the perspective so we know exactly who it is we're talking about. I'm sorry for the wait, Miss Zabrowski. I'm Detective Paul Martin. I understand that you're here to talk about your mother's case. It's Zibataski. Veronica turned around and her heart sank. The plainclothes cop taking the seat at the conference table with his back to the door was a spring chicken. He couldn't have been much older than 12. Great. That's just great. This particular version is actually the version that has stayed in the manuscript because it is delving into Veronica's perspective. And you get very quickly that she is a little bit snarky and maybe a little bit too blunt for her own good. It's a fun character to work with. Let's take another example so you can see how deep point of view is necessary within first person. I could feel my head throbbing, which made me reluctant to open my eyes. I took deep breaths because I felt dizzy and I knew I wasn't strong enough to raise my head. My tongue felt like it was glued to the roof of my mouth. This is first person, all right. It's got your I's, your me's, and your we's, and your my, but it's actually boring. Okay, we know we've got a general gist of what's going on with the character, but we know nothing about the character. We don't know her personality or his personality. There's nothing there for us to grab onto. This, by the way, is exactly what I see coming across my desk from a writer who is writing first person for the first time and doesn't understand the concepts of deep POV. So, what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of the tell that's in this. So, what have we got? We can do this. My head throbbed and I was reluctant to open my eyes. I took deep breaths until the waves of dizziness lessened and I was strong enough to raise my head. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. Okay, this has got show and we've got a bit more of a sense of what's happening, but we're still lacking the personality. So let's move this into deep POV. It was like someone decided to turn my head into a bongo drum. The pulsating was nauseating. I have no idea how long I laid there on that floor, my eyes closed and taking breath after breath, trying to keep my stomach from heaving, but it was long enough for my tongue to stick to the roof of my mouth. Okay, we have a lot more show in here, and not only that, we know a little bit more about this character and their perspective. They really don't like feeling the way they're feeling. There's a bit of personality coming through because their head's a bongo drum. What would this be like if we actually put it into third person? Would it be just as deep? It was like someone tried to turn Veronica's head into a set of bongo drums. The pulsating was nauseating. She had no idea how long she laid there on that floor, eyes closed and taking breath after breath, just trying to keep the contents of her stomach down. But it was long enough to give a sandpaper feel to her tongue that stuck to the roof of her mouth. I understand the personality of this character. I understand what's going on around her. I understand how she feels. And you know what? It's in third person. Okay? You don't need to have your deep point of views in first person all the time. They can be in third person, but it is a different story. Okay, so what are the common misperceptions associated with deep POV? Well, I hear this one all the time. First person is more intimate. No. First person, for it to work well, you need to employ a deep POV. And without deep POV, it is literally just a collection of me's, we's, and I's. Remember the example that we had before, where it started out with a very telly passage. It wasn't very intimate at all. It's the deep POV that creates that intimacy. It's your show within your manuscript that will create that intimacy. Third person can be just as intimate if you are using deep POV. I've also heard people try to convince me that deep POV can only be used in third person. Hello? What have I been saying all this time? Without deep POV, first person does not work. It is just a collection of I's, me's, and we's. You need the deep POV for first person. And I've heard this one recently as well. First person is an unreliable narrator. Excuse me? What? Okay. If you just happen to come across these articles that I came across recently myself that say that first person is an unreliable narrator, recognize that the person who wrote those articles does not understand what an unreliable narrator is at all. An unreliable narrator will draw incorrect conclusions about a scene. Now, that can be in first person or third person. That can be shallow and deep POV. That can be in Innocent as well as limited close. You know, you can have your really unreliable godlike character. It could be almost like, the anti-god. Who knows? Your unreliable narrator is a different subcategory that should not even come into this conversation, but for whatever reason it does. So just keep that in mind if you see those articles. Not all stories need to have deep POV. Some genres and age categories actually work better in your shallow perspectives. Middle grade can actually quite frequently be a shallow POV. Certain voices or writing styles do not suit the deep POV. Just think of these ones. Terry Pratchett, he was third person omniscient. Lord of the Rings is third person omniscient. Vince Flynn, who is considered to be like the godfather of thrillers for whatever reason, third person omniscient. And then, of course, Harry Potter is third person limited. So you have a limited perspective. That's all from Harry's perspective. But it's a shallow POV. It's not very deep at all. And Ender's Game from Orson Scott Card is third person limited shallow POV as well. Just because you don't use a deep POV within your story does not mean that it's the death of your story. In our next video, we're going to talk about another editing tool that I use all the time within my own personal writing. It's called the editorial synopsis. Yeah, okay. Somebody's going to freak out and go, oh my God, synopsis. Ah! Okay, so we're going to talk about what a synopsis is, but we're also going to talk about how the editorial synopsis differs to that of a submission synopsis and how you can take advantage of it. That video should be available for you in the next few days. Meanwhile, if you have any questions about what we talked about today or any of the other videos that are in this series, please feel free to drop me a line. You can contact me on Twitter, and that's at blackwolf_ed, or you can contact me on Facebook, and that's Blackwolf Editorial, or you can contact me through my website, and that's blackwolfeditorial.com. Alternatively, if you are interested in my personal projects, feel free to drop me a line at Twitter, and that's at Judy L. Moore, or you can find me through my website, and that's judylmoore.com. Meanwhile, I look forward to helping you take your writing to the next level.